Let me open with something that's going to sting a little. If you're over 50 and you've been pushed into a job search you didn't go looking for, there's a real chance your resume is getting sorted into a no pile before a single human being ever lays eyes on it. Now take a breath, because that is not the whole story. Plenty of people in their 50s and 60s are landing strong roles at serious companies for serious money, and they're doing it right now. But I'd be lying to you if I told you the bias wasn't real, because I talk to people in the back third of their careers all the time, and a lot of them are watching their phone sit completely silent in a way it never did before. So today, we're going to stop pretending that doesn't happen, and we're going to do something about it. I'm Dre, and on this channel, I pull back the curtain on how hiring actually works. Not the polished version companies put in their press releases, but the version I've watched play out from the inside. And the question we're chasing down today is the one nobody in HR wants to say out loud. Why do so many employers quietly avoid hiring older job seekers? And far more importantly, what can you actually do about it if that person is you? Quick word before we get into it. This is educational, it is not legal advice. And the legal protections I'll mention are framed around the United States, where workers 40 and older are supposed to be protected on paper. If you're watching from somewhere else, the underlying dynamics are nearly identical, but the rules are different. So drop your country in the comments and I'll build a version tuned to where you live. So why has it become so hard to get hired once you cross into your 50s and, according to some people, even your late 40s? Start with the modern workplace, because it isn't doing anyone any favors. Companies today are obsessed with the next quarterly earnings call. Leaders make decisions based on whether the numbers will look right 90 days from now, because their bonuses and their own job security are wired directly to that scoreboard. And when the pressure comes down to trim, late career employees tend to absorb more than their fair share of the layoffs. Then layer artificial intelligence on top of that. In some cases, the work itself is being handed to automated tools. In other cases, the hiring process is now run through software that filters applicants before a prescriber ever opens a single file. The company selling that software will swear it removes human bias, because supposedly every resume gets a fair read. But if you've got certain things on your resume that quietly scream experience, you can get dropped into the reject bucket without ever knowing why. Nobody will confirm it. Nobody will deny it. But the pattern is real enough that you can feel it. So let's deal with the elephant in the room, which is the set of assumptions employers carry about older candidates. And I want to be crystal clear here. These are not beliefs I hold. I'm naming them because you can't disarm a bias you refuse to look at. There are 4 big ones, and I want you to understand exactly how each one works in the mind of a hiring manager. The first bias is the out-of-touch label. There's this lazy mental image of the older worker as the dinosaur in the corner, somebody whose skills have gone stale and who can't keep pace with how fast everything moves now. And here's the uncomfortable part. Skill atrophy is a genuine thing. If someone spends a very long stretch in one role at one company, comfortable and unbothered, they often stop tracking what the broader market actually wants. This is the hidden danger of the so-called stable job. It feels safe, but underneath, you can quietly fall behind. So when a company builds a layoff list, that's one of the boxes they're scanning for. And a person who stopped paying attention to the outside world can find themselves on the wrong side of the door. Now, is that fair as a blanket judgment? Absolutely not. Plenty of people in their 50s and 60s are sharper and more current than colleagues half their age. But the employer's default assumption leans the other way, and you're fighting that current whether you like it or not. The second bias is wage inflation, and this one is colder and more mathematical. Picture your skill set staying roughly level relative to the people coming up behind you. In a lot of cases, the newer person actually has a fresher version of the exact skill you built your career on. Meanwhile, your pay has climbed year after year through merit bumps and a few small promotions. So at some point, a crossover happens. The market value of your output and the size of your paycheck stop lining up, and the paycheck wins. There are absolutely people late in their careers producing enormous value for what they earn. But there are also people whose wages inflated past what the market will now support while their output stayed flat. Those are the names that get circled, and it traps you in a brutal bind. You either accept a steep pay cut to do the same work, or you try to step down into a lower level role where they look at your history and tell you you're overqualified. Catch 22, fully assembled. The third bias is the known commodity problem. When you've held a similar level for a long time, employers start to assume that level is the ceiling of who you are. Not a stage you pass through, the whole story. I've sat in rooms and heard hiring managers say they just don't see future growth potential in a candidate, and that, stripped of its polite wrapper, is quiet ageism. Here's the part that exposes how flimsy the logic is. If the role they're hiring for doesn't even have a clear path above it, then growth potential is irrelevant to the job. They're holding you to a standard the position itself doesn't require. But the old dog, no new trick story is sticky, and it costs good people real opportunities. The fourth bias is reverse mobility, and this one is pure projection. You've earned a certain title, a certain level of pay, a certain weight of responsibility. So when a more modest role comes open, the employer looks at your history and decides, on your behalf, that you'd be miserable. They tell themselves you're overqualified, you'll be a flight risk, you'll bolt the second something bigger comes along. So they never even pick up the phone. Meanwhile, you are sitting there genuinely willing to step down. You might actively want less pressure, fewer late nights, a simpler scope, more time for the parts of your life that got crowded out for 30 years. But you never get the chance to say so because they eliminated you based on a story they wrote in their own head about what you must be feeling. And the cruel irony is that an experienced person who chooses a lower pressure role is often the most stable, lowest drama hire on the board. Exactly the kind of person who shows up, does the work, and doesn't need anyone holding their hand. The bias costs the employer a great candidate, and it costs you a job you'd have happily taken. Now, if you've made it this far and you've been nodding along, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button, because everything up to now was the diagnosis, and the back half of this video is the treatment. This is the part that actually moves your odds. So what happens to the person who can't get the phone to ring? They start staring down their retirement plan and getting nervous. They begin dipping into the 401k and the savings, and that's where a slow, vicious cycle can start, because every dollar you pull early is a dollar that's no longer compounding for you. This is exactly why so many experienced people eventually pivot into consulting, packaging up their expertise and selling it directly. And honestly, that's not a bad road at all. The catch is that the entire workforce is aging, and over the next decade, this pressure is only going to intensify. So you need a plan, not a panic. Here are the 4 moves I'd make if I were in this fight myself. Move 1 is building what I call a defensive resume. This is a resume engineered to reduce the impact of age so that an employer sees your skill before they start doing math about your birth year. I'd strip the dates off anything that doesn't need them, education being the obvious one. I'd quietly remove the dates from my oldest roles, maybe folding that early history into a separate experience section with no timeline attached at all. I'd scrub out obsolete technology and cut any reference to a company that hasn't existed in 25 or 30 years, because that's just a flashing date stamp. And I'd shorten the whole thing to show roughly the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years. You are not lying about anything. You are simply refusing to hand the gatekeeper a reason to filter you out before your skills get a fair look. Move 2 is leaning hard into your network. And at this stage of your career, you should have one worth leaning on. But I don't just mean firing off generic connection requests. I mean targeted networking. Identify their hiring managers at the specific companies you want and get visible inside your professional lane. The single most powerful thing here isn't collecting contacts, it's nurturing them. Get out there. Become a known name in your local market and your industry circles so that when a role opens up, your name surfaces in conversation before the job ever hits a public posting. That's how a huge number of senior roles actually get filled, quietly, through relationships, long before a recruiter touches them. A warm introduction from someone who already trusts you skips the entire filtering gauntlet we talked about earlier. The resume software never gets the chance to reject you because a human being already decided you were worth the conversation. Move 3 is watching the market before you're forced to. Even if you're employed today and just curious, it pays to keep one eye on what's happening in your field. If you haven't looked at job postings in a few years, start reading them now. Notice which new tools and skills keep showing up in the requirements. Notice what's quietly becoming the new baseline. Then, get ahead of it. Find a way to put that emerging skill on your resume through a project, a certification, a side initiative at work, whatever it takes, so you're never the person caught flat-footed when a disruption arrives. The goal is to be looking through the windshield, not the rearview mirror. Move 4 is the one that gets the most pushback, and I've never understood why. The further you get into your career, the more critical multiple streams of income become. Think about the situation we just walked through. You can't replace your old salary, so you take a lower-paying role, or you start a contracting business where the work is uneven and lumpy. A second or even a third income stream is what keeps your lights on without forcing you to raid your retirement accounts. It is the buffer that lets you say no to a bad offer and get to the finish line with your savings intact. I cannot overstate how much this matters, and it matters most for people stepping into the final third of their working lives. You have to build your own safety net because no one is going to hand you one. So that's the playbook. None of this makes the dilemma easy, but it does make it solvable. And the earlier in your career you start applying real strategy, the easier every one of these problems becomes to handle. If you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s watching this, that's the real lesson. The fixes are simple and cheap when you make them early, and expensive and painful when you make them in a crisis. And if you're the person living this right now, feeling like there's just no way back in, I promise you there is. It takes effort and it takes strategy, but people are still landing excellent roles at strong pay with employers worth working for every single day. If this helped you see the game a little more clearly, subscribe so the next one finds you. And go watch my breakdown on building a resume that gets past the filters, because that's the exact tool that turns everything we talked about today into actual interviews. I'll see you in that one.